If you enjoy what we do, please support the channel by giving the video a like. I used to be the perfect child. I could live up to my parents' expectations, and I could keep up with whatever pace they put me through. My life revolved around their demands, and I was too young to know any better. They were so proud. My mother would put on this radiant smile whenever she heard me play the guzheng, and my father would beam with pride when he saw me in the library. They were both very successful in their own ways, and they knew I could be too. But things get more complicated when you get older. When I turned 16, my life looked very different. I had friends. I had interests. I began to consider life outside Yanjiao and the commuter trains. Yes, my parents were happy there, but that didn't mean I'd be happy too. The pace got relentless. 2 days to practice the guzheng, extra calligraphy classes in the evening, advanced math tutoring from a private tutor in Beijing 3 times a week. I was supposed to wake up minutes before 6 a.m. without using an alarm clock, cold showers to keep me alert, and the constant reminders: no sugar, no screens, no silliness. My friends at school would have a lot of things going on too, but they still had time for the occasional game, or just hanging out. Play wasn't part of my schedule, and a lot of kids in my class didn't like the way I set the bar too high. To many of them, I was their boy across the street, the one their parents pointed to when they needed an example of how a child was supposed to act. But it was unbearable, and in the end, the cracks started to show. One evening, I was up a bit too late texting a classmate of mine, Lixia. She was, by all accounts, the opposite of me. She was lazy, fun-loving, and absolutely unhinged. And still, she was an absolute delight to spend time with. She was so used to talking to people that she could get them to do whatever she wanted. It was easy to imagine her being more successful than any other kid in class, despite being the lowest performer grade-wise. Of course, my mother wouldn't approve of my new texting habit. She'd burst into my room unannounced to make sure I wasn't on my phone. She'd always have some made-up reason to go in. "I need you to finish your milk. Have you scheduled your session with the tutor? Put away your phone. It chafes the fingertips." I'd smile, listen, and finish my milk. I'd double-check my schedule, but all the while I would be thinking of Lixia and how easy it was for her to make me smile. My mother would notice I wasn't paying attention, and whenever she did, she'd say a phrase that had followed me for as long as I could remember. Because just as I was the bane of my classmates, I had a bane of my own. The boy across the street, Yuming. See, while I may have been viewed as the perfect kid in my class, Yuming was the perfect kid in every class. He was 2 years older than me, but was already the perfect young man on the cusp of taking the world by storm. When Yuming was your age, he'd already finished the national qualifier. Yuming made time for his studies. He can pick any job he wants. Yuming doesn't slack off. He's so handsome. He'll have a beautiful wife someday. You think Yuming has games on his phone? You think that's how he got so successful? It was ceaseless. I had heard that same sentence over and over long before I ever set foot in a school, and I was probably going to hear it long after I stepped out. She'd made me hate this kid so much that I couldn't blame my classmates for, in turn, hating me. To think that I was their Yuming made my stomach hurt. But no matter how much pressure was put on me, my heart would slip out every now and then. I'd spend whatever time I could with Lixia and my school friends. Lixia found my rigid lifestyle amusing and loved poking fun at it. "You're my project," she'd joke, "and if you stick with me long enough, you might just turn into someone I'd have a beer with." That was all I wanted, more than sharing the commuter train with my dad or getting a well-earned promotion at some manufacturing company, more than a diploma or title or a fancy car. Nothing would send butterflies through my stomach faster than the thought of sitting next to Lixia and sharing a beer. So whenever I got the time, I'd be with her. Even if it cost me everything. This didn't turn out very well. Someone at school snapped a picture of me and Lixia and sent it to my parents. Probably someone who was tired of hearing how perfect I was. The picture itself was just the two of us laughing together, but it kind of looked like she was leaning into me. It was perfectly innocent, but that's not the way my parents chose to interpret it. You think I'm old enough to be a grandfather? My dad would yell. You think this is appropriate? It didn't matter what I said. They'd already settled on their own narrative, and I wasn't to be trusted. They'd ask me to explain, then reject whatever I said. You think Yu Ming chased girls at your age? You think he had time for that? And there it was, the wonder child, the boy across the street, ever present, ever perfect. My parents decided to deal with this by making me a more rigid schedule. My days were planned out to the minute, and they had my phone taken away. They called my teachers to make sure they kept an eye on me. But the worst part, they called Lixia's parents to make sure they knew what was going on too. Or at least my parents' version of what they thought was going on. I can't imagine what they told them. While my parents were inside having a loud argument with Lixia's parents, I went to take out the garbage. I needed some fresh air, and garbage was preferable to whatever circus was going down in that kitchen. I noticed someone across the street also taking out the garbage. Yue Ming. He'd recently turned 18, and he was about as perfect could be. He could make taking out the garbage look elegant. He had a perfectly pressed shirt, and every hair on his head was cut and shaped and combed. His shoelaces were perfectly even, his pants perfectly fit. He could have been on his way to a job interview. I waved at him, and he waved back. On any other night, I would have left it at that, but I was so frustrated. I could hear my father yelling through the kitchen window. How do you do it? I asked him from across the street. Excuse me? Yue Ming asked. How can you keep this up? I asked, and how do you do it? He thought about it for a moment. The September air chilled the sweat beads on my forehead. I got all the time in the world, he smiled. Don't you? As he turned away, I was furious. Maybe he hadn't intended for it to feel like an insult, but it was. I had worked myself to the bone trying to be the perfect son, and I kept falling short. And there he was, acting like it was the simplest thing in the world. I hated him. I figured Lixia would hate me too. We didn't talk at school anymore, and I could feel the teacher's eyes on me whenever the two of us were in the same room. I missed talking to her. It's like I couldn't smile without her. The days became painfully slow, and whatever extra effort my parents demanded seemed impossible. Instead of keeping my eyes in my books or looking at my phone, I began to look across the street. Yue Ming wasn't just the boy across the street anymore. He was a mockery. He became a fixation. I wanted to see him do something imperfect. I needed to see a crack in the veneer. Either he was perfect and I was broken, or he was just as broken as I was. I needed to know what kind of world I lived in. Was I truly not good enough, or was he masking his faults? Yue Ming would do everything expected of him. He played the piano, he spoke 4 languages, he could recite poetry by heart. His calligraphy was flawless, and he could hold a pleasant conversation with anyone, young or old. He never had to sacrifice anything, it seemed. He could do everything without skipping a beat. But there was one thing that not a lot of people would see. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor directly across from Yue Ming, and at just the right angle and at just the right time of night, I could see something in his room. A little light right by the window. Not every night, but every now and then. That had to be something. Maybe he was on his phone before going to bed. So he wasn't perfect after all. I wanted to do something or say something, but I didn't just want to throw it in my parents' faces. I wanted something real, not just wild speculation. If I could find what he was doing, I could give my words some real weight. If I could show my parents that the legendary Yue Ming wasn't the ideal child, maybe they'd ease off the pressure. Maybe I'd even get my phone back. I decided this was the time for me to be brave, to become the kind of person that Lixia would like to have a beer with. I decided I was going to steal Yue Ming's phone. This wasn't as big a deal as it sounds. Our families were pretty close. We had spare keys to go into their home to water their plants whenever they were out of town, so getting in was easy enough. I just had to wait for the right time. I knew exactly where to look, so I just had to get the timing right. Looking back at it now, it was dumb. I was a petty teenage kid who wanted to impress a pretty girl. But you gotta consider that I never rebelled against anything. I had done absolutely everything by the book, and it made me miserable. So this one act was not just to get some air beneath my wings, it was also just to prove to myself that I was my own person, that I could make something of myself that wasn't bound by the will of my parents. So one afternoon when Yuming and his family were away, I took my shot. I made it across the yard and hid in their garden. They had these beautiful yellow lilies and blue sunflowers that his mother cared for. I sometimes helped water them in the summer. I listened closely to make sure no one was moving inside. I knew there'd be no one home. I'd seen them all sit in that car, but I still thought I heard something. There shouldn't be anyone inside, but there were footsteps. I couldn't pinpoint the exact location, though. I thought about calling the whole thing off, but another part of me wanted to see Lixia's face when I handed her a stolen phone. She'd laugh until her face turned red. So with that picture in mind, I unlocked the back door with the spare key and slipped inside. There was a sound in the living room, like someone turning the pages of a book. I could hear someone else wandering around upstairs, but that couldn't be. They were all gone. So what was I really hearing? I made my way upstairs. I could hear the electronic thumping of a washing machine. I left the lights off, stayed close to the wall, and leaned into Yu Ming's room. It was about what you expect. Diplomas on the walls, photos of him shaking hands with local businessmen, printed out emails singing his praises, the occasional newspaper documenting some notable local achievement. I tried to look past it and tried to think of where he might hide something bad. I had to think like him. He did everything himself, so there would be no reason for his parents to suspect anything. He could hide something out in the open or in the most obvious place. So if I was him, I'd just stick whatever I was trying to hide under the bed. And lo and behold, there was something there. It wasn't a phone. It looked like a plate made of an inch-thick black stone with a reflective surface in the middle. I didn't know what to make of it, but it had a faint glow to it. This was, most probably, the thing that Yu Ming sat up with late at night. I tried to pull it out, but it was stuck to some kind of branch. It didn't make sense. It was under his bed. Why would he keep debris and branches in his bedroom? I pulled it loose with a snap and heard something in the house shift. A sudden silence. Then footsteps. Hurried footsteps coming up the stairs. Not just one, but maybe two or three people. Maybe more. I had to think fast. I closed the door and locked it. I opened the bedroom window, hoping no one was out to see me. I put the plate inside my shirt, leaned out, lowered myself down and dropped. I scraped my knees and palms on the gravel, but I made it. Instead of heading straight home, I figured I'd take another route so they wouldn't see me crossing the street. So instead, I headed in the opposite direction, to another street, and casually walked back home like I had nothing to hide. I'd blend in with the crowd. I found a plastic bag by the side of the road which I put the plate in, and by the time I got home, no one suspected a thing. It looked like I was coming home from the store. I wandered up to my room like nothing had happened. Not exactly what I'd hoped for, but I'd be damned if I went home empty-handed. But looking across the street to that empty window, I felt my heart skip a beat, like I'd missed something important. There's this gap in the plastic above my ceiling lamp where I could store the plate. I'd found the space years ago when I was cleaning my room, and I'd never seen my mom even close to discovering it. It was a great hiding spot, and I had a remote lesson with my Beijing tutor that night, and I tried to be a little more attentive. It was as if I was trying to set things right by being extra good. My parents wouldn't notice, of course, but it felt right to me. This had, all in all, been a tiny act of rebellion. It's not like I'd broken a window or slashed a car tire. I'd just taken a strange, glowing souvenir. That night, after brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed, I took the plate down. I closed the blinds of my window, as to not incriminate myself. If I could see Yue Ming with it, he could surely see me as well. The plate was warm to the touch. It wasn't really like a classic plate you eat off. It was more like a discus. Like a rock you might skip across a lake, but bigger. You had to hold it in two hands. But what was most surprising was the reflective surface in the middle. It wasn't just a mirror. It was almost like a world in and of itself. And the strangest thing, I couldn't see myself. I sat up in bed trying to figure the thing out. How could I see the wall behind me but not me? Where was that faint orange light coming from? The thing had no space for batteries. There was no make or model, no text, nothing. And the stone itself felt natural, like something you might pick from a river. Long after my parents went to bed, I was still awake, holding that plate. What's so special about you, I wondered. What's your deal? And while it couldn't tell me outright, I had a feeling it was going to show me. The next morning, I had a look at it before breakfast. I sat with it in my lap as my dad was getting ready for work, and my mom was milling about in the kitchen. I already had the day planned out, minute to minute. There were no surprises in store. I just had this one quiet moment in the morning, and that'd be it. So I sat there staring into the plate, trying to imagine what Wei-Ming might have done with it. I didn't have the slightest idea. It looked sort of tacky, like something a tourist might hang on their wall. As my mom called out for breakfast, a resentment settled in my stomach, like the starting shot for a race I didn't want to run. I held the plate up to my forehead and sighed. Just let someone else do this, I begged. Just let me be me. I heard a click by my bedroom door. I looked over and felt my mouth run dry. There was someone standing in my bedroom. I didn't recognize him at first. A young man with messy hair, like he'd just gotten up. But when he looked back at me, the realization hit me like a truck. It was me. I was looking at myself. Peering into the reflective surface of the plate, I could see myself wandering out of my room and getting ready for breakfast. I went to sit down with my parents, and I could speak to them like I was there. It wasn't like controlling a puppet. It was more like living two lives at once. I was in my bedroom, clutching the plate, but I was also downstairs having breakfast. I could feel the texture of the tablecloth on my fingers, and at the same time I could feel the stone of the plate. It was disorienting. I missed my mom saying something, and she commented on how distracted I was. My dad followed, caught it immediately. Stay focused, he said. You won't catch Yue Ming off guard, that's for sure. A part of me nodded and acknowledged this. Another part of me, the one still up in my room, grinned. I hid under the bed, clutching the plate. A part of me got ready, went to school, and paid attention in every class. The other me was still at home, skulking around the house. But whenever I put the plate away, I could feel that connection fading. There wouldn't be two of us unless I held it close. This had to be Yue Ming's secret. He could do it all at once. He was literally living several lives. No wonder he could do everything. He wasn't restricted by a single time and place. Something about this plate allowed him to do several things at once. So I experimented a bit. I made another me, one that would go around the house and clean. All the while, I kept the plate in my lap as I practiced the guzheng. It was effortless. Once I got the hang of it, it wasn't a distraction at all. Once I got into the rhythm, it was like a symphony, a harmony of actions, all playing out at the same time. It was beautiful. I got so caught up in it that I didn't realize most of the day had passed. I had gotten so much done without batting an eye. I'd practiced, I'd read a little, I'd cleaned the house, and performed well in all my classes. And I wasn't even tired or resentful. It was easy, and when I wanted it all to stop, I just put the plate away and let my other selves dissipate. One would wander into a bathroom stall and disappear. Another would go into a storage closet or just wait until no one was around to see. And soon it was just me. I hadn't had anything to eat all day, so I decided to make my parents dinner. By the time they got home, they were suspicious to say the least. I cleaned up a little, I said, and figured you could do with a bit of rest, Mom. How are you home so quickly? She asked. Did you skip class? No, we finished with geography. It was an easy test, so I had some time left. Easy, huh? My dad said. What kind of questions were there? As I finished dinner, I told him about the various questions that had been on the test. I hadn't been there personally, but the memories of me being there remained. I could describe everything, down to the texture of the paper. They didn't know what to say, but the results spoke for themselves. The house was clean, dinner was served, and once those results came in, they'd see I wasn't kidding around. This would continue for a couple of days. I'd hide under the bed with the plate to avoid my mom accidentally spotting two of me at once. One would go to class, another would stay at home, being tutored online or practicing the guzheng. But I could do other things too. I had another me sitting in the library, reading my father's classical books. Another me would make the beds and clean the carpets. And all I had to do was stay in that dark space, holding that plate close to my chest. But it was getting harder and harder to let go. Every time I put that plate away, I would feel them all wither away. It would just be me, and the me that remained wasn't all that impressive. I'd lost some weight from missed meals, and my eyes would be red from forgetting to blink. But I still did well. I could hold a conversation with my father about things I'd read in his library. I could tell my mother about the classes I'd taken, but all the while they didn't really trust me. I didn't look okay, and that was turning into a problem. But I had a solution. The next day, I had another me dedicated to making sure I was okay under the bed. He handed me lemonade from the kitchen and snacks throughout the day. And when my parents got home, he was the one to hold a conversation with them. He looked perfectly fine after all. Unlike the real me, to him it was effortless. I could imagine him as the ultimate speaker, and I'd watch my parents beam with pride. It was so heartwarming that a smile stayed on not just my lips, but the lips of all my bodies. But then there was Lixia. I still wanted to spend time with her, but there was no way for me to go to school while still holding the plate. I had to stay at home, undisturbed. So what she saw every day in class was me, but not really me. The real me was stuck under the bed, living a dozen little lives at once. I'd forget he was there sometimes. It's hard to get hungry or thirsty when you have 8 different bodies to keep track of at once. If one of them is feeling a bit peckish, you're not going to notice. One afternoon after class, Lixia pulled me aside. We just had a couple of seconds before the teachers caught up with us. "You know, your parents were really mad," she said. "They don't want us to talk anymore." "I know," Schoolme said. "I'm sorry about that." "I still want to talk, though," she continued. "You're fun." "I am?" I asked. "Sometime," she agreed. "Not always, but you can't be fun all the time, right?" "Right." She leaned back and looked into the hallway. One of our teachers were coming down to see what we were doing. She turned back to me, grabbed me by the ears, and gave me a big kiss. My heart skipped a beat, and she wandered off like nothing had happened. I just stood there trying to stop the world from spinning. My first kiss, and it was in a corner next to the janitor's closet, and still I couldn't stop smiling. That night, as I put away the plate, I lay awake in my bed. I could perfectly describe that kiss, but it was more like telling a story rather than remembering. I had all the words in my head, but had it really been my experience? It was getting harder to tell. I looked across the street. Yuming's room was dark. It had been for some time. I hadn't seen him in days, and I wondered if he was okay. Maybe he knew something about this thing that I didn't. Maybe there was a trick to it. I just had to try harder. I figured the problem was the me staying behind. The one stuck under the bed, holding the plate. I was too disconnected, and I was too quick to throw my copies away. So instead, I'd do a marathon. I'd stay under there for days, letting them do everything. I figured if I cut my original self out of the picture, that meant everything else had to become more real. It made sense, like how you can taste better when your eyes are closed. I put a wet towel over my eyes, a pillow behind my neck, and covered the bed completely. And I would stay under there longer than I ever had before. I could immediately sense a change. All the other versions were so much clearer. I could hear my shoes against the ceramic tiles of the school cafeteria, and at the same time, I could feel the strings of the guzheng in the living room. I'd feel the paper of my father's books as I browsed his library, slowly turning the pages. This was the way the plate was supposed to be used. I could do everything. I could do it all. Now, using it for a day or two isn't that big a deal. You get used to it. At times, you even forget you're in several places at once. It becomes second nature, and you turn into this hub of thoughts and experiences. You compartmentalize things, and you get praised for doing so. My parents were prouder of me than they'd been in years. My father would smile more. My mother, too. I could skip class with Lixia and still read the course textbook 6 times over before the next day. I just kept doing it. There was no reason not to. I couldn't find a single problem with it, and it just went to show how much of a blessing this really was. No wonder Yuming was such a wonder child. He'd had a trick up his sleeve all along. And as time passed, I would start to forget that none of it was really real. It wasn't my own eyes reading those books or my ears hearing Lixia's words. But I didn't care. But one Monday morning, when I was in science class, I noticed something strange. A version of me was sitting behind that desk, and my fingers started to move on their own, like I was playing the guzheng. But that version of me was at home. My teacher gave me a curious look, disturbed by the tip-tapping of my nails. I laughed a little. "Sorry," I said, "please, don't mind me." But it wasn't just me saying it. I said it in 3 different places, including to my Beijing tutor. My actions started to bleed over from one place to another, intermingling. I figured I might need some kind of reset, like a computer. I needed to get back on my feet, dust myself off, and have a proper night's sleep without stuffing myself under the bed with the plate. Perhaps I'd used it for too long, which sent an uncomfortable thought up my spine. How long had I been using it? I had no idea. Out of the blurred sea of experiences, I couldn't find that one mind in the dark, stuffed under the bed. I couldn't feel the towel over my eyes or the weight of the stone. I could see and hear a lot of things, but it was all just copies. Of a copy? Of a copy. Dulled senses, slowly breaking down. The part of me playing the guzheng got up from his seat and wandered upstairs, but his steps got confused with the pace of another me, the one leaving science class to use the bathroom. They both tripped, but one of them blinked out of my mind. I had the one in my father's library put down a memoir and get up from his seat. "What's happening?" I said in 3 places at once. "What is this?" A version of me stumbled into the school bathroom. The girls' bathroom, it turns out. Lixia was leaning against the sink, talking to a friend. When I entered, her friend excused herself. Lixia smiled at me, proud of me for taking some initiative. But she could see something was off. One version of me was opening a door, making the one in the bathroom wildly swing an arm as if I was having a seizure. "What's going on?" she asked. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," I said. I could hear my voice echo in the bathroom, and the kitchen, and the library. "Something's wrong," I continued. "It's not working." "What's not working?" she asked. "What are you talking about?" I opened another door, and the one version of me making lunch in the kitchen suddenly swung around, spilling boiling water all over my left arm. The pain was immeasurable. It was one thing to feel a burn, but to feel it in several places at once. It's indescribable. I fell to the floor screaming, tearing at my clothes. I saw Lixia's face turn from worry to terror as she called out for help. Then she saw something in me. I could see a vague reflection of myself in her eyes, and as she blinked, I disappeared. There were less and less of me left. The one in the kitchen, gone. The one in school, gone. The one in front of the computer, gone. Heartbeats blinking out of existence like the stars going dark. Finally, it was just the one who'd been reading in my father's library. I lumbered up the stairs trying to convince myself that the pain I felt wasn't real, that it was just a distant memory. The boiling water had never touched me. I got to my room. I was so cold and empty. It was just one left. What happened? I knelt down next to my bed. My pulse pounded in my chest like a jackhammer. Had it really been that long? Didn't I used to have a copy that was supposed to check on me? Had I forgotten? What if I was dead? My hands cramped around the fabric as my sweat-stained palms burned. I could still feel the boiling water. I could still see Lixia's terrified face. None of it was real, and in another sense, all of it was. So I pulled back the covers and I looked under the bed. I must have lost at least 40 pounds. I couldn't recognize myself. Skin and bone, clutching the plate like a dead houseplant. I pulled myself out. I barely weighed a thing. I lift myself up and placed me on top of the bed. There were spider webs in my hair. My fingers were thin, like branches of a dead tree. It struck me that they reminded me of the branches I'd found under Yuming's bed, holding that plate to begin with. Realization struck me. Those weren't branches. That had been Yuming, the real Yuming. I'd pulled the plate from the root, killing every copy of him. That's why I hadn't seen him for so long. I'd taken it all away and I had no idea. I hadn't even recognized him as human. He must have stayed under his bed too, clutching the plate like it was his entire world. I'd pried it from his dry, callous hands, without knowing they were hands to begin with. I didn't know what to do. I paced back and forth. I couldn't tell if I was even alive. There was some movement, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't see it. For all intents and purposes, it was just one of me left. If this version of me disappeared, there'd be nothing to take my place. But what would happen if that original me died? Wouldn't that mean that there was no one left holding the plate? Wouldn't that mean I would go away forever? There was a tingle in my fingertips. I could feel something in my hands, a numbness. I was running out of time. I hurried downstairs. I picked up the phone and dialed the emergency services, almost dropping the phone as I hurried back up. My tongue slurred as I told them the address and where to find me. I don't think I'm breathing, I repeated over and over. I don't think I'm breathing. But I was. A version of me, at least. Or was that the real me? Was I breathing or just remembering what breathing felt like? Panic. My eyesight blurred. The operator was telling me to stay calm, that someone was on the way. As they did, the phone slipped out of my hands and hit the floor. My legs were shaking. I blinked, but my eyes were going dark. I still had one thing to do. I forced the stone plate out of my disheveled hands, reached up, and slid it into the space above the ceiling lamp. I couldn't have them take it. They wouldn't know what to do with it. I fell to the floor, and I couldn't get back up. I tried to fumble in the back of my mind, reaching for that distant space where I'd come from. The original me had to be there. There had to be a mind there. There had to be something left. I couldn't go out like this. I couldn't die. I couldn't just disappear. But I did. There's nothing that can explain the sensation I felt, because there was nothing to feel. It'd be like trying to explain what the world was like before I was born. I don't miss that time. I don't know it. I wasn't a formed consciousness. But even if you're there for it or not, time marches on. Every minute is a minute, no matter how you experience it, or if you're there to experience it at all. And at some point, the clock in my mind started ticking again. Time slipped back into my world and blood pumped back into my senses. A pulse. "I hear something," someone called out. "Keep pushing." I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't blink another me into existence. This was it. A darkness, and a distant voice calling out. A pressure on my arm and something cold on my face. An ache in my chest as it rose and fell. I was being taken to the hospital. I was being saved. But just the one. My left eye opened in the middle of the night, a dark room. My mother had stepped out to get a cup of tea. My father was asleep in the waiting room. There were cables and tubes and machines. So much effort to keep me breathing, to keep my heart pumping. And all I could give in return was one open eye looking up at the ceiling. A tree outside was dancing in the wind, casting a long shadow across the wall. I could imagine it as a 12-fingered hand, as pale and skinny as mine. Then something dark. A figure blocked the moonlight coming in from the window, killing the playing shadows. I looked to the left. He barely looked human. A tall, skeleton-like man, his hair long and white, his lips drawn back in a death's head grin, his fingers long and thin. I'd seen them before. He leaned in, gently placing a scalpel on my chest and pushing it up against my throat. He whispered into my ear with an unsteady throat. "Where is it?" I looked at him. I couldn't answer even if I wanted to. He pressed the scalpel harder. "Where?" I tried to answer, but I couldn't. He leaned on my chest, pressing the air out of my lungs. But as he leaned back, air rushed into me, enough for me to form an answer. "Ceiling lamp," I wheezed. He looked at me, his eyes clouded in a gray haze. This was the wondrous boy across the street. This was the toll it was taking on Yueming and his legendary success. The cost of perfection. He tapped me on the chest in a silent thank you and left the scalpel behind. When my mom came back, the room was empty. She just sat down and finished her tea in silence, praying for me to get better. The plate was long gone when I got home. I had to use crutches for the rest of the school year, and my parents were instructed to keep me calm and rested. They couldn't explain my extreme weight loss and dehydration, but it could partially be the result of immense stress-induced trauma. I needed rest, proper nutrition, and time to recover. I think that even without the doctor's orders, they'd have let up the pressure. Almost losing me was a wake-up call. They couldn't stop telling me how proud they were and how worried they were. Maybe they truly didn't know, or maybe they were just ashamed of being called out. I couldn't tell. I'd still see Yu Ming every now and then, the perfect boy across the street. When he moved to Shanghai, the entire block came to see him off. I watched him from my bedroom window, his perfect hair and bulging physique. But I saw something in his eyes that others didn't. A little shine, like the reflection of something distant and alien, like the sheen of the eyes of a porcelain doll, not quite real. And when he loaded a particularly large wooden box into his moving van, he looked up at my window. He knew that I knew what was in it, and just like always, he waved, and I waved back. It's been years, but I still think about Yu Ming. I wonder if I'd want to go back to that kind of scattered life. Yes, I could do it all and see it all, but I couldn't really value any of it. Not even my first kiss. Luckily, that was just the first of many. Lixie and I went to the same university, and we've been inseparable for years. And I dare say our second kiss was much better than our first. We had a beer together, and my heart hasn't stopped fluttering ever since. I was there, all of me, and to be able to give yourself to one thing, to 100%, has a value that can't be measured in success. She told me about that day in the school bathroom. She couldn't explain it, but to her it had been like I was never there. Like she'd thought I was there, and when others came running, I was just gone. Like waking from a dream, but sometimes I get cold. I get this overwhelming sense of loss, like I'm not living up to my full potential. Like I am missing so much life, just staying in one place, doing one thing. How can you value having a meal with a loved one if you could have 10 meals with 10 loved ones? And when this me is gone, what remains? But those thoughts dwindle and pass, and what remains is a warm, comforting thought. That yes, I could be doing other things, but there is value to living in the now, to make your own decisions, and to have those decisions cost something. If we can do it all, does any of it really matter? I can't say I'm not the smartest kid on the street. For that, you'd have to ask Yu Ming.